Let's begin with the foundations. Welcome to another lecture. Today we take up a subject that is as much about a city's psyche as it is about basketball, the New York Knicks. I am Professor Alexei. We shall proceed with due rigor and, I hope, a modest dose of dry amusement.
Hello everyone. I'm Priyanka. I'm excited to learn out loud with you today. The Knicks are a big story in sports and culture, and maybe we can unpack why, step by step.
To frame our discussion, the New York Knickerbockers, shortened to the Knicks, are an NBA franchise based in Manhattan, playing at Madison Square Garden. They share that building with the New York Rangers, and the arena's midtown location renders every game a kind of civic seminar, with global media and often a front row of celebrities serving as unblinking peer reviewers. It's important to understand that the setting itself has become an independent variable in the franchise's narrative.
Building on that, they compete in the Eastern Conference Atlantic Division, so rivals like the Celtics, 76ers, Nets, and Raptors shape their season arcs. Also, I'm curious about the name. Knickerbockers sounds, very historical.
Indeed, the moniker references Washington Irving's pseudonym in A History of New York, later attached to descendants of Dutch settlers and, by extension, to New Yorkers at large. Ned Irish, Madison Square Garden's president, adopted it in 1946 after a staff vote, and media expediency soon shortened it to Knicks. We observe that branding here is not mere ornamentation, but a deliberate tether to the city's historical self-image. As we continue, why does this matter today? The Knicks are a cultural bellwether. When they surge, the arena vibrates at decibels that echo through talk radio and global broadcasts. When they stumble, the same platform amplifies critique, sometimes catalyzing leadership changes. Madison Square Garden has hosted signature basketball moments, and that spotlight in this context is an economic engine as well as a psychological pressure chamber.
Isn't it interesting how their importance can, be overshadowed by win-loss records? People sometimes reduce the story to droughts and disappointments, but the team's role in the NBA's evolution seems much bigger than that snapshot.
Let's start with the history. Two quick telling facts. First, along with the Boston Celtics, the Knicks are one of two original NBA teams still in their original city, and continuity since the BAA's 1946 founding has produced a multi-generational archive of memory. Second, in November 1946, they won the first game in BAA, later NBA history, defeating the Toronto Huskies 68-66 at Maple Leaf Gardens. A modest scoreline, a monumental beginning.
And two timeline landmarks. The franchise was included as a charter club at that 1946 Commodore Hotel meeting that created the BAA, and in 1999, as an 8 seed, they upset the top-seeded Heat on Allen Houston's runner, swept the Hawks, beat the Pacers with Larry Johnson's 4-point play, and then reached the NBA Finals against the Spurs. That underdog path still feels improbable.
It is worth noting additional early milestones. In 1947, Wataru Misaka joined the Knicks, becoming the first non-Caucasian player in the BAA. And in 1950, the Knicks signed Nat Sweetwater Clifton, often cited as the first African American to sign an NBA contract. Historically, attribution is nuanced. Chuck Cooper was the first black player drafted. Earl Lloyd was the first to play in an NBA game. And Clifton's signing is about contract timing. The trio jointly marks the league's desegregation threshold. Before we get to the complexities, a brief personal connection. As a mathematician who plays far too much chess, I find the Knicks' strategic history an instructive case in intertemporal choice. When to sacrifice material for initiative, when to protect options, draft picks, cap space, rather than chase a tempting but risky tactic. In simpler terms, avoid blundering your queen to win a pawn on move 20. Madison Square Garden keeps score loudly. This logically leads us to three big questions. First, how has the Knicks' identity evolved under different coaches? Second, a counterfactual on retained draft picks and asset discipline in the 2000s. And third, what the present strategic posture implies for future outcomes, subject, of course, to uncertainty. Big question one, identity through coaching. Under Joe Lapchick in the late 1940s, the team emphasized up-tempo play and ball movement, producing 9 straight playoff trips and establishing a competence baseline. The true cultural inflection, however, arrived with Red Holtzman in 1968. Defense, unselfishness, and role clarity became axiomatic, enabling the Reed, Frazier, DeBusschere, Monroe, Lucas synthesis that yielded titles in 1970 and 1973.
I often think about that Willis Reed moment in Game 7 in 1970. Does that, symbolize the identity more than the playbook does? Leadership as strategy, not just tactics.
Precisely. Reed's limping entrance is a case study in sports psychology. Minimal statistical contribution, maximal collective self-belief. The effect was catalytic. Walt Frazier's performance soared, and the Lakers' equilibrium fractured. Under Pat Riley in the 1990s, identity hardened into a defense-first, physically assertive brand. Jeff Van Gundy sustained and refined that posture. Rivalries with the Bulls, Pacers, and Heat were not coincidental. They were the natural experiments of that identity colliding with contemporary rules and officiating norms.
Can we say that frequent coaching changes might dent morale, or does a clear identity buffer the shocks? I'm curious about the mid-1970s carousel versus, say, the 2012 bump when Mike Woodson took over and they stabilized.
We can infer that stability plus role clarity typically raises the floor of performance. The mid to late 1970s oscillation, Holtzman to Reed to Holtzman again, coincided with roster flux and underperformance. By contrast, 2011 to 13 saw a coherent defensive philosophy, strong veteran roles, and a three-point identity that produced an Atlantic Division title and the first playoff series win since 2000. Identity functions as institutional memory. Without it, turbulence propagates. Big question two, the counterfactual on draft capital and optionality. The Eddie Curry trade in 2005, which conveyed unprotected first-round equity to Chicago, is a canonical lesson. Seeding high-variance future outcomes impaired the Knicks' flexibility, exactly when injuries and randomness could intervene. Later, the 2010 cap space strategy traded near-term productivity, Jamal Crawford, Zach Randolph, for the chance at elite free agents. Amari Stoudemire arrived, and soon after Carmelo Anthony via trade. But the aggregate asset cost constrained depth.
So, I guess the question is, if those picks were protected or retained, do we get a smoother rebuild curve? Fewer boom-bust cycles and more room to course correct without overpaying later?
Theoretically, yes. Pick protection is insurance against tail risk. In real options language, holding draft capital keeps the right, not the obligation, to invest in future upside. It also improves trade leverage. A plausible alternative path features stronger bench units, staggered star acquisition, and less exposure to injury shocks. That said, New York's brand calculus valued immediate relevance at Madison Square Garden. The trade-off delivered moments of high wattage, Linsanity, Melo's 62-point night, a division crown, even if it extended the time to sustainable contention. Big question 3. Present strategy and future shape with necessary caution. Recent seasons showed a return to defensive standards and development, notably the 2020-21 playoff return led by Julius Randle and the integration of R.J. Barrett as a core piece. Subsequent acquisition at point guard added on-ball stability, and some accounts project further star pairings and even a 2026 finals return. Such forward-dated claims, it is crucial to understand, are contingent and require external verification before we treat them as history.
What if we thought about it like this? Sustainable success probably means balancing star power with depth, plus keeping picks to refresh the roster. Do the Knicks' current moves suggest that kind of, portfolio approach?
In this context, the signals are mixed but encouraging. More disciplined cap management, better development pipelines, and fewer rash, unprotected obligations. To evaluate sustainability, we should track leading indicators: lineup continuity, on-off differentials of core players, three-point attempt rate without sacrificing defensive rebounding, and above all, preservation of draft optionality. The Eastern Conference remains a strategic arms race. Durable contenders combine stars with surplus two-way wings, and the patience to avoid chasing every rumor through the Garden's echo chamber.
Maybe it's just me, but the Linsanity burst shows how quickly narrative can change when system fit meets opportunity. So, I'm curious whether today's front office is designing for those unlikely upsides, rather than just, waiting for a blockbuster trade.
Speaking of design, the lesson from 2012 is that marginal adjustments, who pilots the pick and roll, how spacing is structured, can unlock hidden production and, incidentally, global attention. The current challenge is to institutionalize that agility, so the next undervalued guard or stretch big flourishes by design, not accident. If that is achieved while keeping the draft balance sheet intact, the Knicks' ceiling rises without mortgaging the future.
So yeah, moving on, or maybe rounding off, New York versus Brooklyn. Does the older lineage at the Garden still confer a cultural edge, even when records are similar?
The Knicks' uninterrupted presence since 1946 is path dependency at metropolitan scale, a reservoir of intergenerational identity that is hard to replicate. The Nets' Brooklyn era introduced a compelling counterbrand. Nonetheless, the Garden's gravitational pull, history, location, and the ritual of full houses remains a persistent advantage in attention economics, independent of season-to-season variance.
To shift gears a bit, we didn't mention the 1997 suspensions in detail, but that series really shows how rules interpretation can flip outcomes. Bench decorum turned into a decisive factor.
Correct. The bench-leaving rules enforcement in that Heat series reallocated New York's rotation at precisely the wrong time, a governance lesson as much as a tactical one. It illustrates how institutions, rules, and enforcement clarity co-produce results with talent and coaching. Hence, sustainable planning must also anticipate procedural risks. To summarize, the Knicks are an NBA original anchored in Manhattan, playing under the brightest arena lights. Their significance exceeds any single standings table because they have, time and again, shaped league history. From the inaugural 1946 game to Red Holtzman's two-title paradigm to the 1999 eight-seed run. Our three questions traced identity across coaches, the counterfactual of pick retention, and the contours of present strategy amid uncertainty.
Maybe that's something we can come back to later, especially how brands and buildings amplify decisions. For further study, we'd suggest the broader history of the NBA and its cultural impact. League governance, media economics, and how arenas became theaters of social meaning.
This then completes our present analysis. Thank you for listening to another lecture. Be well and remember, in basketball as in chess, development and tempo are seldom free.
Thank you, Professor, and thanks to everyone for joining us today.